And welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. Man, a week without playing the Georgia music, and I start the intro before I'm even done with the dang music. Gosh, rusty here, but hey, it's Thursday night. Not our usual showtime, but hey, we wanted to go 2 a week. We wanted to go 2 this week. May go 2 next week. We don't know. It's going to depend on how everything unfolds. We have big news dropping later tonight. It is show related, so stay tuned. We will drop that later tonight before the show ends. Stay here because next Tuesday, we're going to have a big episode. Another big episode. No, not only because Georgia's in the national championship game, not only because of that, but we got some big news regarding the Top Dog Talk podcast. Dan, how are you doing this Thursday evening?
I am feeling much better. Hopefully you can hear it in my voice that I feel much better. I've been not working today, so my brain is not fried, and I've been prepared for the show. I've been texting you things all day long today, and you're like, it's not even 2 o'clock, and you already have the show planned. So I actually felt like I contributed to a show for once.
Hey, Dan came prepared. He came prepared last week, really prepared last week. It was a great, or not even last week. It was Tuesday, Dan. Dan, it's so weird having a 2 shows a week that I'm thinking our last show was last week when it was really last Tuesday. I woke up this morning, Dan texted, or no, it was actually this afternoon when Dan texted me. I'm like, Dan's already has hot topics picked out in my head. I'm like, Dan already has hot topics picked out for Tuesday. I'm like, oh shoot, we got a show Thursday. Just not even think about it. Just completely left my brain in that moment. So, hey, I'm excited. We're excited to be here with you today. And like we said, got big news coming. So let's kick it right off with hot topics of the week. I know this past Tuesday's show was a little bit different format-wise, but hey, we wanted to give you a full hour's worth of Ohio State, Georgia thoughts and reactions. And today, we're going to give you about probably 25 to 30 minutes of TCU preview. We got a lot to talk about in about an hour's worth of the show. So with that being said, Dan, hot topic number 1 of the night. What do you make of the mass exodus of these mass exodus through the transfer portal of these programs? I am pulling it up right now. Share my screen real quick. Sorry, I am unprepared today, but we're going to get it right up in a moment. So, Dan, with that, just take it away.
All right, so this will be more useful once the graphic gets up. So when I saw this this graphic that On3 put out, it is a list of the programs with the most players transferring. And a lot of times when there are players transferring, there we go, perfect. This is much easier. So a lot of times when players like this transfer, there are reasons. There are reasons that you can point to, and it's not always a panic situation for the program. So the one on this list that you have to be most concerned about, well, 2 really, is Texas A&M at 27. Now, you could easily make the argument that a lot of people are going to transfer out of a program. And where did my graphic go? There we go. Just fine. Leave it like that. So with 27 players leaving Texas A&M, when they brought in the number of 5 stars that they did last year and again, remarkably bringing in again this year as many 5 stars as they are, you would assume that number 27 would be the upperclassmen who have been pushed out by the much better talent that has come in behind them. And then that number would make a lot of sense. However, that's not the case. That number 27 does include some upperclassmen, but it also includes a large number of the highly recruited, paid-for players that they got that Jimbo swears up and down they didn't do. I'm not hard to find. Okay, well, you know what? Neither is those kids because they're in the portal. And we know exactly where to find them, Jimbo, because you're a trash coach. But that number is extremely concerning because those players are the guys who just got there. And, we talked about this before the season started. We talked about this early in the season, that there was a rumbling coming out of Texas A&M that a lot of the stuff that was promised to those kids, they were not delivering on that promise. Whether they're just flat out not getting the money at all, they're not getting exactly what they were promised, or there were stipulations put on that money that weren't put on when they were promised. So, a lot of big issues. Florida at 22. So this is a little bit less panic than Texas A&M. I mean, if you're a Texas A&M fan base, you should be extremely concerned with that number 27, basically because of who it is that's leaving and why they're leaving. The Florida makes a lot of sense. You have a brand new coach. It takes a coach. I mean, I don't know what the transition numbers look like for Kirby, but coaches get rid of people that don't fit the profile of what they're looking for. Guys who won't bend to the culture, guys who are just not good in the room. So that number at Florida makes a lot of sense. Billy Napier, first year, not a good year. So you have some kids who are leaving because they're upset. You have a lot of those kids who are leaving because they're being told, just get the heck out of here because we don't want you. Arkansas 22, I'm not really up to date on exactly why that is. Maybe it's because they had a bad season. Arizona, same thing. Jackson State is the other program you should be extremely concerned because the only reason those kids were there is because Dion was there. So all the high level talent that was at Jackson State, they're like, Dion's out, I'm out. So those are your good players leaving. That's not the bad players. Those aren't the players who couldn't get on the field looking for more playing time. Those are the guys who are starting. So you're screwed, Jackson State. Congratulations. Miami. Again, new coaching staff, sometimes it's because they're pushing people out. Maybe that's the case there. Harrison and I were extremely high on them, and they had a disastrous season. Cristobal, whatever. So maybe that's a large number of guys that he's getting rid of. I won't go through all of them. My point is every single one of us is different, okay? So every situation is different. Some you should be extremely concerned and some not. And the one that you should be extremely concerned about is Texas A&M. Sorry, Harrison. I went real long there, but go ahead and jump in, brother. You're on mute, kid. It's a Thursday. And he's still talking on mute like he's never done this before.
It's rough. It's a rough start to the show for me. But with that being said, it is a rough start for Texas A&M, a rough offseason for Texas A&M. But I don't think, Dan, we kind of talked about this really it's this season and really last offseason is, your prediction was that, hey, if Texas A&M has a bad season, that, hey, maybe those guys will hit the portal. And I think you've kind of been spot on. I don't know. I don't know if we could say we saw this coming, but it's kind of hard to look at it and say, like, this is surprising, in a way, because I think it is kind of surprising. I don't think it is surprising. I think expectations were really high, and they didn't meet up to that expectation and had a really bad year. So, Dan, I guess we could touch on it, but we didn't put in the show notes. Texas A&M did make that offensive coordinating hire, which, in my opinion, is very lackluster. I thought they should have went as far as they could go, put as much money as they can on the table to go get a guy like Garrett Riley, who's taken TCU to their offense to new heights. We're going to get to the TCU offense later in the show. An up-and-coming offensive coordinator, brother of Lincoln Riley. He's had a lot of success offensively at Oklahoma and USC. That's a guy Texas A&M needs to go get. But hey, Jimbo Fisher found someone he wanted and went to get him. And I don't know. I don't follow Texas A&M. I don't cover Texas A&M, so I don't know what they went after. I don't know if I can't confirm if they went after Garrett Riley. But hey, that's where my money would have been if I was Jimbo Fisher and making that decision on who to go get. But hey, we're gonna figure out how that looks. Come the season, we're gonna figure out what that offense looks like. It's gonna be interesting. But yeah, to me, Dan, in Texas A&M's case, I think it's kind of concerning with all these players jumping into the portal. I think it's very concerning. I think the culture's not right there, and obviously they had a really bad season. And hey, sometimes you gotta, like you said, sometimes you gotta process people out of the program. Sometimes people do have to go. Georgia does it. Alabama does it. Every good program lets players go, and it's not all because of behavior reasons. It's not all because of their detriment to the locker room. Just sometimes because you got to free up scholarships. It is a business at the end of the day in college football now. With NIL and the transfer portal, players are going to make business decisions, and coaches are going to make business decisions. That's the truth. That's how it is. And right now, with the way the structure of college football is, it is getting closer and closer and closer to kind of just emulating the NFL. Each offseason, it feels like me and Dan will come on here for years coming forward talking about how the NCAA is taking another step to make it less an amateur sport and more a professional sport. That's just the way it is. And with that being said, let's transition that. This is going to be a great
That's
segue.
a great transition. This guy has redeemed himself. He's talking about making amateurs into professionals. Let's go.
Dan, hot topic number 2. I did not know about this till you texted me. Georgia High School State Athletic Association is having an emergency, or I don't know if it happened there or it's happening in the future sometime soon. They're having an emergency meeting to discuss allowing NIL, name, image, and likeness for high school student athletes. Question is, did we just find a Pandora's box inside of a Pandora's box?
Yeah, buddy, here it is. You knew it was coming, my friends. You knew it was coming. And so I have to admit, part of this, I'm basically stealing from Chuck and Chernoff's show today. So like Chuck was talking about on his show today, that whenever NIL became a possibility for college football, immediately you had coaches coming out telling their state or legislature, if you don't do this, you're going to screw our school, because some states were going to allow it and some were not. And this was at the beginning of it. So just if you can transport your mind back to before they came out and said it's all good, do whatever you want to do. So originally, whenever the whole talk of it started about NIL, some states were going to allow it, some states were not, and then some states were going to be a little bit more liberal with it, and some states were going to be a little bit more strict with it. Now that has trickled itself down to the high school, and you knew it would not take long. So now you have situations where I won't use his name because that's not right. He's only 15 years old. But there's a kid who lives in this state who is on every single social media platform in the world. He himself will tell you he's the best player in the world, and everybody else is telling you the same thing. So if you know who he is, he's a skill position player. He's amazing. Well, there has been some talk that his parents are going to try to reclass him to be a senior next year, from a freshman to a senior, so that they can go ahead and capitalize on the NIL deal in college. And they want to get there before there's legislature put in place to limit how much they can make, because it's a cash grab. They want it. Because I saw what happened with Nico. And I mean, listen, you have to understand that, like, that's a lot of money. And I get it. I totally get it. And the kid is probably good enough to where he might be able to handle it. I don't know. But anyway, so I think this is a position to keep those kids in high school, to prevent them from going up. Because in theory, if you're over 15 years old, you're allowed to have a job. I mean, as long as you have a work permit, you're allowed to have a job. I mean, it limits the amount of hours that you're allowed to work, but you can have a job. So the same argument that a college kid can make, a high school kid can make, right? Where if I want to go work at Kroger, I can go work at Kroger. And I can do that now as a student athlete. I can go, I did. My entire high school career, I worked at Kroger bagging groceries. So, but imagine if Kroger wants to sponsor me, right? Or, I get a job at Kroger and I don't actually have to show up for the job, but they just say Dan works at Kroger and they're going to pay me $4 million a year. I mean, but like literally you could do that, right? And then the other part of the argument is that private schools for the longest time have been paying for players in a different way. They pay your tuition. So like if I wanted to send my son to Prince Avenue and he was as good as Brock was, and I'm not saying this applies to Brock because his dad's the freaking head coach. So he probably didn't pay tuition. But if I wanted to send my son to Prince Avenue, they would pay his tuition if he was good enough and worthy enough of a scholarship. It happens all the time. So, and I'm not going to throw all these schools under the bus, but Prince Avenue is a really good school. They don't cheat like that, but there are other private schools who really do cheat. But you knew this was coming. Oh my God, did you know this was coming? Because once it happened in college and that argument was made, anybody with a brain would say, wait a minute, hold on, that same thought process could apply to high school students. My biggest fear is that they're going to okay it, and then this is going to turn into the Wild Wild West. Like I don't know how it's going to play out. I don't know the parameters. But and that's the other thing too, is I don't have any faith in GHSA. That's probably one of the worst run organizations in the entire world. This full of money grab, money hungry, good old boys. I mean, it is terrible. I could give you specific ways that GHSA is probably the worst organization in the country. But if you know anything about GHSA, you already know. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But anyway, I don't have faith that they're going to get this right. I don't. But I guarantee it that these kids are going to be allowed to make money, Harrison.
I think it's inevitable at this point, and it started to kind of come out when NIL started becoming a huge thing, and it was going to get on the precipice of being allowed in college. And I remember reports coming out of high school players asking, "Hey, can we get our money now? Can we get it early? Like, can we start doing it? Can we start getting deals?" And it's very possible that I think it's going to happen. Now, my question is, Dan, is what are the regulations? What are the rules in place? How can they prevent people from being poached off of another team's roster? Like, hey, you're at an Under Armour school and you want to go to a school that's a Nike school. Like, you got to make sure you can't poach people off rosters. That is the number one rule. There's scandals with it all around high school right now, and almost every state is talking about recruiting off of other teams' rosters high schools. You're not allowed to do it. Not allowed to do it. And Dan, correct me if I'm wrong. You're not allowed to do it anywhere, I don't think. I don't think there's a single state in a single high school athletic association that says you're allowed to recruit off of the team's rosters. They forbid it.
No. Well, I will tell you the one thing that the NHH, the National Federation of High School Athletics, the one thing it did do is it put things in place where if a coach leaves a school and goes to another school, you can't follow him. So, like, for example, oh gosh, I cannot believe his name just slipped my mind. I just had it on the tip of my tongue, and that's why I jumped in. The basketball coach at Mount Verde in Florida. It's one of the biggest basketball factories in the country. So he was the coach at St. Joseph's in New Jersey. And you'll know the name Nazi Muhammad, the big center, 7-foot center. He played for him there, and he followed him to Mount Verde, which he did. But he had to sit out for an entire year. He had to sit out for a year because you can't follow your coach. So that has been put in place, and that's trying to prevent coaches from poaching rosters. But man, there's ways around everything, man. The player movement in high school these days is absolutely laughably ridiculous. The crap that Grayson gets away with is absolutely insane. They had on that national state championship team, they had 7 guys that were out of district that moved in just for the season. And then they all went back to their schools after the season. How that was allowed, I have no idea. The running back that went to University of Michigan posted a picture of him in the mailbox on a vacant lot that he was using as his address when he went to school at Grayson, mocking the system, and they didn't do anything to Grayson. So it is what it is, man. It's like I said, I don't trust GHSA at all. Like the kid moved from California, was it Jake Garcia? I believe he went to Valdosta, and then they ruled him ineligible because it wasn't a legitimate move. The kid moved from freaking California to Valdosta, and they said it's not a legitimate move. And then 2 weeks later, they said, "Oh, but you can play at Grayson. That's cool."
It happened. So I just want to see some regulations regarding that and rules, and I want to see it upheld. It's hard. I mean, they're putting themselves in a tough position, but like Dan said, I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen almost everywhere. Just kind of depends on where you live. And hey, I mean, this could just be one big, like Dan said, cash grab and player grab for not just random high schools in Georgia, but for all of Georgia high school sports, saying to all high school athletes out there, hey, you want to come make money as a high school athlete, if you're in the state of California, you don't have NIL opportunities in high school, how about you move to Georgia and capitalize off that if you're a big name recruit? So I think yes, it could level. Well, I'm going to move on because if I have to utter the phrase level the playing field on this platform for anything, Dan, I've just broken all my rules. But with that being said, let's move on to Dan's rant of the week, talking about the playoffs, Dan.
Oh, this one should be a good one. So, whether it be me, Harrison, Jeremiah, Jonathan, any of the guys that you typically hear about, guys that we're friends with, we're all pretty much in agreement in that 12 is not better. And if you watched this round of the national semifinals, they were incredible. Both games were absolutely incredible. I mean, it's I have not. Okay, I air quotes enjoyed term loosely because I suffered through the Georgia game. I was miserable the entire game because I do not do well with tight, stressful games. Okay, I don't.
I bet the rewatch was great though.
Yes, the rewatch was great because I knew the ending. So yeah, but I was stressed out watching the game. But in all fairness, both games were extremely tremendous. But if you go back to the start of the college football playoffs, you've not had 2 tremendous football games in the same season ever up until now. This is the first time that both games were that incredibly close, down to the last play. Anybody could have won type deal. Typically they're blowouts. Last year, for example, was the norm. Georgia blew out Michigan and Alabama blew out Cincinnati. That is normal. So now the talking point is because these games are so amazing that all 12 of these games are, all 12 of these teams that they're going to let in the 6 games or whatever, they're all going to be amazing. It's going to be, did you see the playoffs this week? Oh my gosh, it's amazing. It's like, don't let the recency bias fool you because that is complete horse crap. History tells us these games are going to be an absolute blowout. Harrison and I have been saying all year long, I won't speak for Harrison, but I know I for sure, and Harrison, chime in if you want to, there is not a dominant team this year in college football. Georgia has been the best, most consistent team out of all the teams this year, but there has not been a runaway train like there has been pretty much every single year. Is that the NIL balancing things out, taking some of the 5 stars away from Georgia, some of the 5 stars away from Alabama? I don't know that that's necessarily true. Although if you go and look at the top 25 teams in recruiting, you did see more and more teams that got 5-star kids this year that typically don't. So Alabama got 8. Okay, so that's ridiculous. That's about as good as anybody's ever gotten. I went back the last 6 years, and I didn't see anybody with more than 8. I think Texas A&M had 8 last year too, right? Harrison, correct me if I'm wrong. Was it 8?
Maybe.
Okay, so it was 7 or 8, but anyway, I haven't seen anybody with more than 8. So Alabama's still being Alabama. Georgia only got 2. So last year I think they had 4. I think the most Georgia's ever gotten in the class was 6. We've never recruited the way that Alabama's recruited. We've just done it more consistently. And our 4 stars has actually been just as good as their 5 stars. So, there goes the Kirby can't develop narrative. Anyway, but it did spread some talent out. But there just really hasn't been that dominant team this year. Is that a fluke or is this going to continue? I would caution you against saying that this is the new trend and that every team is going to be able to compete. And whenever you put this field of 12 teams together, that it's just going to be tremendous football across the board. The other thing that we learned this past weekend, top 4 seeds cannot be division winners. If they were, Michigan would have got a bye and Clemson would have got a bye, and they both lost. And somebody else who got boat raced would have had a bye. I can't remember who the other one was.
Kansas State.
Kansas State. So 3 of the bye teams got absolutely boat raced in the playoff or in their bowl games or the playoff. And those teams would have had a bye. Where teams like Georgia or like Alabama, Ohio State, all these teams would have had to play in the first round, which were clearly better. So I know what they don't want to happen. They don't want the 4 byes to be all SEC teams. I get it. But you have to make it the best teams. You cannot make it just conference winners because not all conferences are created equal. And the Big Ten claims they're the best conference in football. They claim it every year. Every single year they say they're the best. But they can't beat Georgia. Go ahead, Harrison. I'm good.
You're good? My bad about that. Everything's kind of blowing up on me tonight. But with that being said, yeah, Dan, you bring up a lot of good points, and I definitely agree. There hasn't been one dominant team in college football. I think Ohio State's been a really good team. Georgia was a really good team this year, and obviously Ohio State lost to Michigan. Alabama was not living up to expectations at all. At all, Dan. We both came on. I don't remember exactly, but I believe, looking back on the offseason, I was one of the ones that thought Alabama was probably going to be the favorite. Well, obviously they were the favorite to win it all, but ended up not. And I was kind of bought in on that. It was going to be a really great Alabama team. They're going to have a really great year, and they're going to go undefeated. Georgia was going to be kind of like the first team they played that was going to give them a run for money. And beyond Georgia beating them, I don't know. That I bought in on that, and that failed. Texas A&M, I had them second in the SEC West, despite Dan putting them probably about, I don't remember exactly where Dan put them, but Dan was probably right on the money as to where they fell in the SEC West. Bought in a little bit too much on that one too. So it's kind of tough to see if this is a trend. And I honestly think, Dan, it's kind of a little too early to talk about whether or not, 5 stars are getting spread out. I need to see it over the next 3 or 4 years to kind of get a judgment of, is this actually helping? Is NIL actually elevating schools rather than just making it more, the rich richer and the poor poorer? So I want to see it over the next 3 or 4 years. Is college football going to have a dominant team again? Eventually, they will. Will it happen as often anymore? Maybe. That's yet to be seen. Because Georgia obviously had a lot of turnover, had 15 players go to the NFL, 13 players enter the portal. That's 28 people that left the roster from a year ago. And Georgia's turned over that roster, and now they're back in the national championship looking to have a repeat.
Just to put a bow on my segment, the bottom line, guys, is expanding to 12 is not going to produce more of these amazing football games that you witnessed this weekend. It's just not going to. So it's going to happen. So guys like me who hate change and just want to hold on to stuff, like I have to acquiesce that it is going to happen, but it's going to be a lot of bad football. So just strap up and be ready. But hey, listen, you're not here to listen to me rant. You're here to hear about this Georgia TCU preview. So let's get going, Harrison.
Absolutely. We are 26 minutes in. A lot faster than
Told you it was a loaded show.
And with that being said, it is time to get into the national championship, as Dan said, because Georgia has a chance, guys. I don't know if everyone realizes how rare this opportunity actually becomes true and a repeat champion is crowned. You've had them over the years. The last one to do it was Alabama in 2011, 2012. Since then, there's been 3 times where a repeat champion had the chance to go back-to-back, Dan. You know what those champions are since then? They are 0-3 in championship games since then. Alabama played for one, Clemson played for one, and I'm forgetting the third one that had the chance, but 0-3 in those games. So history is against Georgia in this game, I would say. Just because look at the history dating back to Alabama. Nobody's done it. Not even Alabama themselves. And Alabama's had a lot of great teams, a lot of high talent dating back to 2011, 2012. They didn't get it done. So it's a great matchup. I'm excited for this. By no means am I going to come out here and we'll wait and see what Dan has to say. I don't think this game is going to be a 13-point win on either side. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I'm not going to come out here and be aggressive, kind of like I thought Georgia was going to be out here, come out and beat Ohio State and kind of beat them, not blowout fashion, but beat them by 10 points. Maybe you get a Ohio State garbage time touchdown, but Georgia's going to win and look good doing it and kind of make you comfortable for most of it. I'm not coming into that with those expectations. We saw what TCU did when they were counted out against Michigan. Everyone and their mom, including me, including Dan, thought Michigan was going to run them. We all thought it, and TCU proved us wrong. So we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. We're going to give them the respect that they kind of deserve to this point, because you look at these two teams, they're complete opposites. TCU looking to become the first preseason unranked team to win a national championship since 1990. You know who did it back then? Georgia Tech did it. Now, granted, that's a split title. Georgia Tech doesn't really own that title. It was back in the day of when you had to have a unanimous kind of champion, national champion. They weren't unanimous. Colorado had majority of the polls, but hey, in the coaches poll, Georgia Tech won the national championship. Compare that to Georgia. Georgia's been that team all season long. Now, despite they weren't the preseason favorite because that was Alabama, but predating Alabama's first loss, Georgia looked like they were the top team, even when Alabama had a 1-point win at Texas. Even when Alabama kind of struggled, but they hadn't lost yet. Georgia still looked dominant. And it wasn't until after Georgia got that kind of number 1 ranking for the first time where you started to see the cracks of, hey, this isn't the same Georgia team in the sense that they're going to go out there and dominate everybody. They're going to go put 50 and 40 on people's heads, but they're going to go out there and they're going to win. So it's an interesting matchup. I'm really excited for this, Dan, because there's just so much storylines behind it. You have 2 really good quarterbacks, two quarterbacks who've been doubted. Max Duggan, Dan, was not the starter for TCU coming into the season. Similar situation to what Stetson Bennett was last year, but he came in, he's been the Cinderella story, and the quote Cinderella story is the perfect way to describe this whole TCU team.
Well, so Max Duggan played quarterback last year. A guy came in, apparently took the job, then got hurt in the first game. Max Duggan went in and played well, kept the job, right? Sounds very similar to Stetson Bennett, just like Harrison said. national championship football teams pretty much have fallen into a couple different categories. Either they had more talent all across the field than everybody else to win a national title, electric playmakers everywhere, good defense, right? Alabama, those teams. LSU had 5-star wide receivers all over the field, a generational quarterback. So they had that, right? So you have that one. And then the other one is you have just absolutely elite quarterback play and talented wide receivers. And so TCU falls into that category where they have an elite wide receiver who is picked by most every. Oh my gosh, I just got hiccups all of a sudden. Sorry. They have an elite wide receiver, and I don't know why I can't think of his name. And Harrison does not have it in the notes, and I am mad right now. It's Johnson, but I can't remember his first
Second
name.
page, Dan. Second page.
All right, I'm going. Quentin Johnson. Sorry, Quentin Johnson for over 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. And he's 6'4". I mean, he is a nightmare matchup problem. The kid is going to be a first-round draft pick. I mean, he is going to be top 10, top 15 pick, depending on how well he plays against his Georgia defense. If he torches this Georgia defense, he could easily be the top receiver taken off the board because most NFL scouts will tell you that Georgia's defense is as close to an NFL look you're going to get. So when players do well against this Georgia defense, that really helps their stock. Like Marvin Harrison Jr. stock is going to go through the roof. And then Max Duggan having absolutely an elite season, and he's a dual threat guy. I know. Listen, let's just call a spade, okay? I'm the type of guy who's just going to tell you the truth, and I don't mean it in any other way. You don't hear a lot of white guys be called dual threat quarterbacks, okay? I mean, it's just the truth. But the kid can run, and he can run well, and he will burn you. So he is. But Joe Burrow was the same way. Now Joe Burrow got, they're like, oh, he's mobile, and he can get like, no. Joe Burrow could run, and so can Duggins, and Duggins is tough. So he's that. He's that part where he can throw the hell out the ball. He can run really, really well, and he's extremely physical, and he's tough. And you can beat the hell out of him all day long. He's going to keep getting up. Yeah, I have been more impressed with him this year than I have any other quarterback that's not on this Georgia football team, obviously. I think Duggins has come out of nowhere to be, like you said, Cinderella's story. And the other thing about this game, too, before we get too deep into the woods, when you listen to the radio shows talk about it, it's not a layup because they're talking, today the conversation on 680 The Fan was if Kirby doesn't win, he's going to be tagged with the only title, meaning he only has one title. Bobby Cox only has one championship, right? Like Drew Brees only has one championship. Peyton Manning, has more, whatever. But you get my point is like people are literally talking about Kirby losing this game. Most Georgia fans are like, oh my God, we just beat Ohio State. That was the easiest game we were going to play. And I felt exactly the same way. Having watched TCU now against that Michigan game, and granted, we don't have a large sample size to go from because they haven't been this team because Sonny Dykes has only been there for this year. But he's done an amazing job of installing everything he wanted to install with the players that they had on that roster and turn them into a national championship contending team. And here's the deal. If they're in the game, they're good enough to be there. So you better take them seriously. Go ahead, Harrison.
Absolutely, and you look at the matchup on paper, Dan. It's like you said, it's not a layup. It really isn't. And like you said, credit to Sonny Dykes. He came in there, replaced probably the greatest coach ever in TCU history in Gary Patterson, who, like Kirby Smart, is a defensive guru. Now, Kirby Smart has had a big impact on defensive football and football in general in college football, and even has taken it to the NFL level. A lot of people are taking his findings and translating it to the NFL. But Gary Patterson, man, he's the father of the 4-2-5 defense. When Georgia is in base nickel package, they're in 4-2-5. That's something Gary Patterson had big influence on and was kind of the mastermind for. Sonny Dykes, an air raid guy, the guy that comes from that same coaching tree as Lincoln Riley and all those other guys. He's an offensive minded guy. Mike Leach, yes. Mike Leach. On that Mike Leach tree, same coaching tree, and you see what his offense is now, Dan. And Dan, I got some stats that I've people have been putting out here. Joel Klatt put out some of these stats today, and this one blew my mind, Dan. This one blew my mind. TCU has 21 plays of 50 yards or more on offense this season. 21 plays of 50 yards or more. Not on kickoffs, not on defense, on offense. That's explosive. That's really explosive. That's mind-boggling right there, Dan. And you saw a lot of the explosive plays. We all saw the explosive plays that Ohio State had. They had multiple passes that were explosive plays. I don't know if any of them were 50 yards, but most of them were 10 to 15, some even 20 or 30. Ohio State was the first team that made Georgia's secondary and some of their guys, they matched their speed. Sometimes even made their Georgia look kind of slow. I don't know if you got that same reading, but Georgia looked a step slower on defense than they have in the past, even against Alabama. Georgia's speed still showed up on tape, unless you're playing Jamison Williams, who, without the bum knee, was the fastest man on the football field.
I think the biggest difference that I can take away from the TCU game that we were about to play and the Ohio State game that we just played is, and I was consistent about this the entire time, that Ohio State is recruited as good as you have. They have talent in the same places that you have talent. They have elite talent in the same places that you have talent. Georgia did not have the talent advantage at every single position against Ohio State like they do typically against almost 90% of the teams that they play. TCU, they do. They do have the star advantage in almost every single position. And TCU, like I said, like the teams who have won championships fall into two categories, right? Either they're loaded at every position across the board. They are just out talent you in every single way. Alabama, Georgia, LSU type deal, or they are just extremely, extremely gifted in one area. And the one area TCU has been extremely gifted in is quarterback, running back, wide receiver. And it's not all wide receivers. It's specifically one wide receiver, one running back, one quarterback. Now, Georgia has the star advantage in every other position, and they have the talent to take that away. So this is a very winnable game for Georgia, and that's why if Georgia weren't to win this football game, it would be a massive upset and a massive disappointment. I understand TCU is good. I am not throwing shade at TCU. I'm not peeing on them for all intents and purposes. I'm just telling you.
The expectation is for Georgia to repeat, and it's been the expectation for weeks. That's it. It's not about TCU, what Dan's saying. It's about Georgia. The expectation is Georgia needs to go out here and win this because they have to repeat. They've been the quote-unquote, Dan, as we talked about, next Alabama type reign. I already see Georgia fans on Twitter and Facebook, Dan, talking about how Georgia's probably going to be one of the first teams to have a three-peat. I'm like, slow down there. Like, slow down with the three-peat talk. Me and Dan will get into that. Maybe start in March and April talking about if that's a thing. But hey, me and Dan want to enjoy this football game. And Dan said it. Georgia's recruited at a much higher level. I haven't checked the talent composite. I don't care to check the talent composite just yet to see what TCU ranks because you just know where these two teams are going to match up. But styles make fights, Dan. We've all heard that saying. Styles make fights. And TCU style of football, it's going to make a fight for Georgia, as we saw that Ohio State did. Maybe not to the same level as Ohio State. Does TCU put up 40 points on Georgia? Maybe. I don't see it happening. If it gets to 40 points again and Georgia's in a shootout, it's going to be interesting.
I just feel like Ohio State is a significantly better team than TCU, significantly better. They have more weapons, and they do what TCU does better. I think Ohio State versus TCU, it's just, like you said, styles make fights, right? TCU was a great matchup for Michigan. Now that we've seen it, the Michigan could not run with them. And that's the same issue that Michigan had with Georgia. They could not run with Georgia. And Michigan is the greatest matchup Georgia could ever hope for because the one thing that they do good is run the football, and Georgia kills teams that run the football. The one kryptonite they said of this Georgia team is they can't stop the pass. More times than not, that has been true. I mean, the Tennessee game, they did have guys running open. Now, granted, they were not able to complete them. So, bully for Georgia, they weren't able to do that. And you have to give Georgia credit for them not completing them because they put so much pressure on the quarterback. I get it. But LSU, and I understand we are giving up yardage underneath to keep them from going deep. I get it. But LSU had a lot of success throwing the football. Ohio State had a lot of success throwing the football. TCU can throw the football extremely well. The biggest issue for TCU is if Kendre Miller cannot go, because he is as close to LaDainian Tomlinson as they've had since they had LT. And, that's the other thing about TCU. They've put arguably top 2 or 3, 4 greatest running back in the NFL in LT. So don't say that they don't have talent. This kid is a bona fide, legit star at running back, and he's hobbled right now. And if he can't go, that is a massive, massive disadvantage for TCU, because that kid is so good that you have to be able to focus on him, and that opens up that passing game for their star wide receiver. If Georgia can sit back and not have to worry about the run game at all, because they can stop it with the front four, because they don't have a legitimate running back there with this guy out, then TCU's got no shot at all. But if they can run it and throw it because they have that star running back there, that makes it difficult, and that makes it a competitive game. So that kid being healthy is the key to this game. And I hate to say that a game would come down to one player, but it does, man. It really does. Imagine if Georgia only had one running back and that running back was hurt.
It's funny you bring out LT, because the next point I wanted to make is we're going to talk about the offense at length, Dan, but we need to talk about the TCU defense, because they're going to present a similar matchup on defense to what Mississippi State presented style-wise against Georgia, in the sense that they run the 3-3 the 3-3-5 defense. They're going to play 3 D linemen, 3 linebackers, and 5 defensive back. They want to put as many defensive backs on the field and cloud up as many zones as possible. They're really good at doing it. They played at a high level all year long. They've been a problem. Obviously, they gave up a lot of points to Michigan last week, but Michigan, I don't think that game. I mean, yes, that game was close in the end, but you saw TCU kind of run away. It looked like they're going to run away with it in the first half, and then Michigan comes back. But speaking of LaDainian Tomlinson, his nephew, Travius Hodges Tomlinson, Thorpe Award-winning cornerback. He is the top guy at DB, the top guy. Georgia's going to have to find a way to beat him. Georgia's receivers going to have to find a way to get past him. I don't know if you're going to beat him on one-on-one. I don't know how often Georgia's going to attack him. But you're going to have to find a way to move the football, because if you don't, you're not going to win this football game. Georgia has to score points. It is another one of those games where Georgia has to score points, and it's going to be an interesting matchup. You're going to have potentially some NFL dudes in these matchups, with Travius Hodges Tomlinson facing up off with A.D. Mitchell, a Lab McConkey. They're going to have to find a way. Georgia's going to have to scheme some guys open against this guy, because he is good. Don't for one second think Georgia's just going to, get by against some average to good DBs. Travius Hodges Tomlinson is a really good DB, and that's why he won the Thorpe Award. I think that goes without saying. But the next point I want to talk about, Dan, it's something we've talked about at length, and I think it's been on the mind of everybody, is this Georgia team, unlike others, has been uncharacteristic in one area, and that area has been turnovers. Georgia's offense has been big on turnovers, a lot. They've had a lot of turnovers this year, more than usual. Now, when you go look at Stetson Bennett's numbers, he doesn't have very, very many interceptions, but interceptions haven't been the main brunt of Georgia's problems. It's been fumbles, just uncharacteristic fumbles, and this TCU team, Dan, I believe I read today they had a +2 turnover margin. They're creating more turnovers. They're turning other teams over more than most. And Georgia, I think turnover margin, they're giving up 2 turnovers a game.
I think I was listening to a radio show the other day, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but I believe they said the past 5 or 6 national champions, or no national champion has ever been negative in turnover margin, but typically they're +10 or better. Maybe the Alabama team was like +20 or something like that. I mean, they were like way up there about turnovers, but Georgia's negative. And keep that in mind. No team with a negative turnover ratio has ever won the national title. Is that bad news for us, or are we going to reverse the tide? I don't know. I mean, we're only like -2, so don't get carried away. We're like not -25 or something like that. So But you're right. Ball security is extremely important. Giving a team a short field or the quick turnover, something like that, or God forbid a pick six or something where they're immediately putting points on the board, that's not good. And that creates a upset situation. And I'm fading as the show goes. I'm sorry. I've been so good all day.
And yeah, it's. I mean, it's really going to be key. Stetson Bennett had that interception last week. I believe that was Georgia's only turnover on the day was that pick. And really, if he had a little bit more time in the pocket, I think he probably delivers that ball or maybe steps up and gets rid of it and avoids the interception. Now, I'm not making for him.
I went back and looked at that again, and that interception was tailor-made by Jack Sawyer. Jack Sawyer came off the edge. And Stetson wanted to roll to his right. He stopped him, and he threw it right when he stopped. Because he knew he had to get rid of the football, and it's just a bad throw. Obviously, he'd want that back, but you're 100% right. I mean, that was a defensive forced turnover. Again, it happens, and then also keep in mind like how we talked about this game of inches, right? Keely Ringo did a great, and Keely Ringo gets so much crap, and we've already covered that. But Keely Ringo busts his butt to get back on the play, swims over the top of Harrison Jr., knocks the ball out. I don't know why. I don't know, like with multiple, and they always say the most dangerous fumble is a wide receiver fumble because none of your team is around you. Because what is, when you run wide receiver routes, what are you trying to do? Create separation, right? So the only people around that guy are the other colored jerseys, right? So when you knock the ball out close to the sideline like that, why does the first guy over there not swap the ball back towards the playing field as opposed to running and trying to slide out of bounds? Because you have to control possession. I know it's happening at the speed of light there, and these guys are just trying to make a play. But both of the Georgia guys like run into each other and then push the ball out of bounds. Like a heads-up play right there, we get the ball back, and then it's not a negative turnover margin, right? So stuff like that happens. But Georgia's got to take care of the football, and you can't give this team a short field on a dumb mistake. And then the other thing, too, is TCU knows it's the underdog, right? So Sonny Dykes knows that pretty much everybody in the world expects him to lose this football game. So he has nothing to worry about. He can do whatever he wants. He can coach this game however he wants. He can do the dumbest shit you've ever seen in your entire life. And his explanation would be like, well, you didn't think we were going to win anyway, so I had to try something. Coach, why did you go for it on 4th and 28 from your own 2-yard line? I guess I wanted to. I mean, he can literally do whatever he wants to, and nobody's going to question him. And that makes it a dangerous football game for Georgia because you have to be prepared for anything. And the one thing that we give Kirby and his entire staff for is they are meticulously prepared for every detail. Like that one, was it the block field goal kick return when they ran it back or whatever? And he's talked about they practice it, that they know that they can run that back, but the rule is don't pick it up unless you know you can score, right? So they prepare for like the minute details that other teams don't. And that's going to be extremely, extremely important this week because TCU is a dangerous football team because they don't have any pressure on them at all. Nobody expects them to win. So they can do whatever they want, and they're not going to be critiqued for it. So that makes them a dangerous football team.
Absolutely dangerous football team. And I'm really excited for this matchup. When you look at how balanced they are offensively, they're averaging over, let me look at the stats. They're averaging almost 270 yards passing per game, while also rushing for over 200 yards per game. That's balanced. Georgia's also right along the same lines. Georgia's averaging over 200 yards passing and rushing. So it's really average. And I think some of the key points we're going to hit on before we end it, to end this preview, is it's really going to come down to who's available for both sides. Kendre Miller, number 33. He is a big back, and he's powerful. He's going to present problems in the trenches for Georgia. Georgia's going to have to be on their best at tackling. I mean, you're going to have to tackle this guy. He's going to be a physical back. He's going to look to run you over. He's going to look to run by you. You're going to have to tackle him. And same thing is going to be said for TCU. They're going to have to be ready to tackle a Darnell Washington if he's healthy. A Brock Bowers. You're going to have to be ready to tackle in space. Kendall Milton, it's kind of similar to Kendre Miller in the sense that he can kind of run you over. I don't know if they have the home run speed that someone like Kenny McIntosh do, and they probably don't. They don't run as fast, but if you're not ready to take them on in space, they're going to run you over. So Georgia's going to be ready to tackle, and you're going to have to stop the run. And I think that's kind of what hurt Georgia last week is early on when they were trying to take away Marvin Harrison Jr. is when other guys started to pop up and other guys started to pop off. And My biggest key in to this game, and it's something that Brooks said in the lead up to the Tennessee game. I think it rings true today. It's going to ring true Saturday or Monday, excuse me. Georgia's going to have to find a way to stop the run with their front seven, because you're going to have to dedicate bodies to trying to stop Quentin Johnston. That's the truth. He's, like you said, he could be the first overall receiver picked, the first one picked come April. He could be it. Now, I know it's not a loaded receiver class. I've been kind of looking at some of the other receivers in this class. It's not very deep. Not deep like the years past. But Quentin Johnston, there's something to say about a guy that's going to be picked first overall out of all the receivers in the draft. Very talented. Georgia's going to have to commit bodies. We saw last week, Georgia committed bodies to stop Marvin Harrison Jr. There were times where they bracketed him with a safety. They had the corner and then the safety right next to him. Kind of like when, I forget what team it was, when they were trying to basically just off the rip, double team Julio Jones, just off the rip. So how does Georgia stop the run? Well, they've done it with their front four. They've done it with free roaming linebackers. And let me remind you, Dan, I think this is a similar scenario to how they were in the championship game last year and in the semifinal. The defensive line had a very disappointing performance against Ohio State. Very disappointing. They got pressures. They had a lot of pressures, but they did not convert those into sacks.
We may have some information now on why that Georgia defense was so disappointing. And I've seen this now. I kind of have a rule. In journalism school, they tell you that you should never go with a news thing if you don't have more than 3 sources, right? Or 3 confirmed sources. Well, I've seen it at least 5 or 6 different places now, where as many as 15 players on that Georgia football team, including Brock Bowers and Jalen Carter, had the flu. And that would explain it. And if you ever saw Jalen's face in that football game, he looked like he was about to die. I mean, the entire game, he looked like he was exhausted. Like, I sent in a group text, how did Jalen Carter all of a sudden get out of shape? Like, that's one of the things that Kirby has talked about going into his first national championship game that they lost to Alabama, was that he didn't do a good enough job of conditioning these guys and having them ready to play. Do you remember that? Or I'm sorry, the SEC championship game. Remember that? And he talked about getting his players ready between the SEC championship game and the championship game. That the biggest criticism of that football team was that they were not physically prepared. So he said that would never happen again. So when I saw him that winded, I sent it in the group chat to you guys, Jonathan, Jeremiah. How did he get out of shape in a week or in 2 weeks or whatever? So that explains a lot if everybody was sick. And then another thing that is really interesting, and you talked about, Quentin Johnston, he's 6'4", Marvin Harrison Jr. is 6'4". And, the narrative kept being that Marvin Harrison Jr. just killed us. And then this guy goes on the Paul Feinbaum show, and he's just ripping him, talking about Kirby is an assassin, and he sent his assassin out. Well, he called him a thug and then called him a silverback. I mean, you got to be – come on, man. That's just blatant racism. He's just – and Paul – and thank God, Paul – listen to the world we're living in, dude. Like, we are in a world now where Paul Feinbaum is defending Georgia. I never in my life thought we'd ever get to that point, but somehow we're here where Paul Feinbaum is defending Georgia, and he wouldn't allow this guy to go on and on. He's like, but let me ask you a question. He goes, so your assertion is that Kirby sent one of his players out there to purposely hurt Marvin Harrison Jr. because of how badly he was beating them, right? And then this is the part that Paul pulled out, and he was just like a little ninja on this one. And it blew my mind because I would have gotten this wrong too. Harrison, how many catches and how many yards did Marvin Harrison Jr. have after the first quarter? 0. The answer is 0. He did not have 1 catch or 1 yard after the first quarter. Georgia shut him down the rest of the game. So the narrative that he was the one murdering us was absolutely false. They started going to
Mbuka and
Mbuka, and the other 2 guys started to really kill us. But they figured out a way to take him out. So if you can take out Marvin Harrison Jr., then you can take out Quentin Johnston. They're very similar players, same size, almost the same weight, almost the same skill. And I would argue that they're probably equally as fast. Long-term success, I would almost say Marvin Harrison Jr. is probably going to be a better player in the NFL level. That's just my assertion. If Georgia's able to keep him in bay because they were able to figure out how to stop Harrison, the difference is TCU doesn't have an Mbuka who's a 5-star wide receiver, or
Mhm.
Fleming, who's a 5-star wide receiver. They don't have any of those. They don't have multiple 5-star wide receivers. They have one. They have a Marvin Harrison Jr. They don't have the complement. So I feel very safe but again, Quentin Johnson's going to make plays, guys. He's going to score a touchdown. I guarantee you he scores a touchdown. He's going to make a play. So don't walk into this game thinking we're going to beat them 49-3 like we beat Oregon. I don't see that happening. I think it's going to be a really tough game.
Absolutely, and I'm looking forward to it. I think Dan's looking forward to it. It's going to be the top 5 scoring offense in TCU against the top 5 scoring defense, that is Georgia, in the game that's going to come down to potentially inches, as Dan says, as it did, last week against Ohio State. But hey, guys, that's going to wrap it up for episode number 72 of the Top Level Talk podcast. And for those that stuck with us through all 56 minutes, going to bump it up to 57, we have an announcement to make. We talked about it. We talked about it last week after last week's show. Me and Dan privately talking about we wanted to get somebody on for the post-game national championship. Thought about making it two episodes next week, but we were able to get our guest. That is right. We're bringing on a guest for our regular Tuesday show. And with that being said, he's been on this podcast before, not with Dan, but he's going to be on here with Dan. Both of us are going to be on here for Aaron Murray, former quarterback, Georgia quarterback. Aaron Murray going to come on, talk the national championship game between Georgia and TCU. Going to have a great episode. It's going to be probably about an hour of just really great content. We're going to get his thoughts on everything that transpired Monday night. And hey, maybe Georgia wins the second national championship in a row. And who knows? Going to have some great stories to tell. And hey, I don't know if there's a better person in the space, Dan. When we close the book on Stetson Bennett and we close the book on that, I don't know if there's a better person out there to have on the show to kind of close the book on that chapter of Georgia football than Aaron Murray.
Well, so I was going to say that because it has been my assertion, and I'm not alone in this. I have said for the longest time, Aaron Murray is the greatest Georgia quarterback if you just talk about being at Georgia. He's the best quarterback we had just being at Georgia. So for Aaron Murray to come on here and tell us that Stetson Bennett's the greatest quarterback at Georgia, that's going to be something. So, and he said that multiple times. I don't think his opinion is going to change unless Stetson goes out and throws 19 interceptions on Monday, but I don't think that's going to happen. So I'm very excited to have him on. I've only met him once, and it was in person, and it was when he was a freshman quarterback at the University of Georgia, and I have a very special story to tell about that. So let's see if he remembers it. We'll put him on the spot with that one and see. I'm sure he does not, but maybe he would. He do well. But it's a very cool personal story. So we'll see what he says.
It's going to be an exciting episode. I know Zach shocked. Yeah, Zach. I got him on 2 years ago. And kind of developed a friendship with him. He's a great guy. Does a really good job in everything he does. I mean, from being a starting quarterback at the University of Georgia to going on to the NFL to transitioning back into, being away from football and being a broadcaster for CBS and now ESPN to running his own business in the Players Lounge. I mean, supporting college athletes, not just Georgia. He's not just supporting Georgia with what he's building over there in the Players Lounge. He's supporting all of college football. He has an NIL deal set up with multiple teams. Just a great guy. We can't speak highly enough of him, and we're looking forward to it next Tuesday here at 7:30 p.m. Hey, enjoy the weekend, guys, because Monday night is going to be a long one. Dan, catch some sleep, bud. You're going to need it. We're all going to need it because Tuesday morning may be a little rough, even with a win, especially with a win. So with that being said, guys, it's going to wrap it up for episode number 72 of the Top Level Talk podcast. Episode 73, going to be a big one. Can't wait to see you next week.
And go Dogs!